Go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone to this week's edition of the Commercial Real Estate 101 Meetup group. We started this group back in April of 2020, just really to be the go-to resource for all things commercial real estate. And since then, we've been able to do a lot of virtual meetups and had a lot of people from all across the country tune in, which has been awesome. Today, we actually have a phenomenal guest, Ben, who is a commercial appraiser. If correct me if I'm mistaken, but in New York, uh,
And New Jersey.
yeah, and New Jersey, yeah.
Yeah.
So really, you're focused in those areas. But
Right.
I thought it would be awesome to have you come on and talk a little bit about the commercial appraisal process, because it's an integral part of all commercial transactions. And as we were talking about before this, even outside of commercial transactions, that commercial appraisals can come into play. So welcome to the
Right.
meetup.
Okay. Thanks so much for having me. It definitely is a good idea to have an appraiser. It's a unique, not everyone. It's a unique position. Like you were saying, it's very important in the transaction because if you have a property for sale for 50 million, let's say for example, and you need your loan to value, ratio. You need your value to come in. Um, the appraiser really holds the key,
Yeah.
to the transaction. Of course, we can't be biased, and we have to, you know, give an impartial opinion of value, but it definitely is important.
Oh, for sure. No,
Yeah.
and I think we'll dive a little bit more into the actual nuts and bolts of the process as we go through this meetup. But if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, like what got you into commercial appraisal, really?
Yeah. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I think it's actually a lot of appraisers that I meet. They say that the same thing, that they have family in the business. So my father actually started a company in 1991. He started a commercial appraisal company. So, but he's licensed commercial, and as we'll see, there's a difference between commercial and residential. So he was licensed commercial. Don is saying he's also from Brooklyn. Um, so yeah, he was licensed commercial, meaning he was able to complete a commercial appraisal. However, as you'll see later, he didn't. He wasn't so tech savvy, so he did the residential. Basically commercial is like a 50 to 150 page report, and you have to put in grids and graphs. And the residential appraisal report is more on a form. You basically just punch things in. So he mainly did the forms. Therefore, his clients, let's say lending institutions and banks, were mainly residential. So so 5, 6 years ago when I was entering the workforce, he told me I should go for commercial because residential was, you know, definitely less pay, and commercial it's much more. You could get larger buildings, and the fee would be much more.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think it's a great field to get into in general, just because I feel like there isn't as many on that side of the transaction. I know we've had a big shortage of commercial appraisals here in Kentucky. Louisville is where we're headed at, and I mean we're multiple weeks out for commercial appraisals, and that's generally the sticking point of the transaction as far as the due diligence time frame. So I think it's a smart idea to get into commercial appraisal, for that reason alone. I mean, there's just a lot less competition, and you do get to work on some bigger projects with bigger price tags, which is
Right.
kind
It's a
of
lot more
cool.
fun as well. Also, it's a lot more fun.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I know many companies in New Jersey are struggling as well to find employees for the appraisal for their business. I'm wondering if I don't know why it's like that, why people are not entering it. I'm wondering if like for residential for sure the fees are like dropping, and commercial maybe it takes a long time until you understand the whole appraisal process. So it's like a year or two till you get a license. Actually, um, you have to train by somebody, and it's 2.5 years. Between 2.5 years. I'm not sure if they changed it since I did it. And you have to take 12 courses, and you have to have a bachelor's degree. So could be that's a roadblock to many people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a big part of it is just the diversity of commercial property, just because there's so many different types of commercial property.
Right.
You got multifamily, you got office, you got land, you got shopping centers, you got multi-story office buildings. So there's a lot more it's a lot more to the process than just, a 3-bed, 1-bath ranch style,
Right.
no basement residential property, which again, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just there's differences between the two. So, could you kind of explain what a commercial appraisal is to those of us in the audience?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll start by residential because commercial is above that. So residential is mainly, there's two parts to every appraisal process. The first one is the appraiser has to go down and actually, do an inspection, which is anywhere between a half hour and an hour and a half, I guess, depending on the property. Excuse me. So he would want to see let's say if it's a residential house, you have to measure, and then you have to also see how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, the kitchen, the condition, if there's a basement, if it's finished. So with the residential report, that's a big part. The inspection is a very big part of the appraisal. And then the other half of the appraisal report of the appraisal assignment is to look at sale comps. Sale comps are what sold in the area. So let's say on Avenue, Avenue A, let's say you're appraising a one single family home. You would look within a very close radius for other homes that sold, within a year or two. It depends on the geographic location. In Brooklyn, let's say, every block has a lot of transactions every year, so it's easier. In other, in New Jersey, it's harder to find, sales, which is similar sales which sold recently. So again, then you take those homes and you adjust them to get a value for the subject. Right. So with residential, again, it's a form, like I said, and the main approach to value, the way you get the value is what other buyers bought other similar homes for, and that's a good indicator of the value for the residential property. With commercial, it's very different. First of all, there's another approach to value that we use. We use it's called income approach. Since most people buying a commercial properties for investment purposes, so the main thing they want to know is what their value is, what their cash on cash, So it's called income approach. Basically, you take the rent of, let's say, for example, it's a three unit retail property. So what the rent, what are they getting in rents? And you take off the operating expenses, and then you use a capitalization rate, which we can talk about later, to get the value of the property. So let me go back to commercial property. So let's say you're appraising a retail property, you would go down, you inspect the units. Sometimes it's hard to get into all the units. If you're doing a 50-unit apartment building, you're not getting into all the units. So you try to get a feel of the property, what condition it is, and condition is a big point in the value. We don't have like so many levels in condition. It's mainly below average or fair to average and good and maybe excellent, brand new. I actually saw a post on LinkedIn which was funny. Somebody ordered towels for their swimming pool to like match the logo of the apartment complex, because the appraiser was coming the next day. So I don't know if that provides value, but it's definitely good to have a neat complex so the appraiser could get around and feel what the property is all about. But having matching towels won't add value necessarily to the property. Any questions so far on the inspection part?
No,
Yeah.
I think it's great. I mean, making that distinction between, the sales approach to the income approach is quite
Right.
important. And I think you may also have another one, which is the cost approach.
Yeah,
I don't know
right.
if you guys use a lot of that as far as the analysis is concerned.
Right, I'll get to that soon. Right. So yeah, the sales approaches, again, let's say with retail properties, taking similar, let's say, shopping centers which sold in the immediate area. Again, with commercial, the radius is not as important, because if you have a 100,000 square foot shopping center in Louisville, you may use one comp that sold there, but you may have to go to a neighboring town, to get 3 or 4 sales like we like to use. Again, they have to be closed sales, so actually what people paid for the sales. Some appraisers like to stick in an active listing in the approach just to see, the actual current. Some appraisers actually use it. They adjust, let's say 10% down or 5% down for list to sale ratio, and they come at and they use it as a value. Some appraisers say that that's a top, meaning you use the closed sales to come out to a price, but it's not going to be, the value won't be above the active, because why would a buyer go to your property over that property? Right. Again, so let's say with retail, again, we're looking at neighboring similar shopping centers to provide a value for the subject property. So they definitely have differences, right? The least differences, the better, but you're definitely going to have to adjust for differences. So for example, let's say visibility. If one shopping center has better visibility, and if the subject has, let's say, good visibility and on a corner, and a comparable sale that you're using has inferior visibility, you would adjust a certain percentage upwards to make it comparable, similar to the sale.
So it,
So
it does seem a lot like a nuance type thing where you just kind of feel it out over time. Whereas, in the residential space, it's a little easier in the sense that you have a lot more comps available, so that the differences between what the sales price was and the subject property is, it's a little bit easier to estimate exactly what's going on as far as, what does an additional bedroom give you or an additional
right,
bathroom give you.
right,
Whereas on the commercial side, it seems like, you're going to have a lot more gray area as far as, okay, well, this one has more visibility than this one, we're going to have to adjust it accordingly. And usually that means 5-10%, whatever else.
right,
So
right. Again, there are some appraisers who, or it depends, if you're giving testimony in court, then you may have to provide proof of the adjustment. For example, let's say visibility adjustment, go back to that one. If you're adjusting 5%, you would need to show that a corner versus an interior parcel is 5% difference, which is very hard. And maybe some appraisers do that, some appraisers don't, let's say a market condition. For example, if a comp sold, let's say pre-COVID and after COVID, you will adjust for it.
definitely.
Again, right. So you're basically adjusting for characteristics which provide value in that asset class. You're going to adjust and see which is better and which is worse. So that the characteristics also play a role in the income approach. Again, in the income approach, you're looking at the rent. So we have to, first of all, the rent also depends on all these positive or negative attributes, characteristics of the property. So the characteristics play a role in all the approaches to conclude on a value.
Definitely.
Right.
That's some great advice. Yeah. So as far as the commercial appraisal side goes, how do banks or lending institutions really get in contact with you, right? I mean, obviously they're dealing with business clients, and then they may get a property that, that they're interested in buying this property. How do you get involved in the transaction as far as the commercial appraisal is concerned?
Right. So as we discussed before we went live, the banks are one of the users of an appraiser. Again, they're lending money on a property, and they want to know if it forecloses, if they take over the property, they could sell it and get their money back. So for banks, you have to be on their approved appraiser list, meaning the borrower typically doesn't pick the appraiser, and they don't even want you to know the appraiser. It's even worse because they want to make sure the value is impartial. So you have to, I guess, appraisers reach out to banks and get on their approved list, and then some banks send out to many appraisers to bid on the job, and some banks pick 3, and you bid against 3 people. But I'm sure there's different banks that have different policies. But the main thing is, typically you have to be on the bank's approved appraiser list in order to get work from them. Like I said, there's other users of the appraisal, right? So hard money lending, right? So they're not as strict or they're not as corporate as banks. You don't have to get on their approved appraiser list. And then there's for estate purposes. If somebody dies and they leave over, let's say, 10 properties, which they have to pay estate tax, so an attorney or the owner could pick. In this case, the owner could pick, actually, and you value the building for estate purposes. Also, before, there are people that give their, let's say, 10 buildings, they put it into a trust before they die. It's called gift tax. There are some positive, reasons to do it before you die, and so they also hire the appraiser. So typically, if you have relationships with owners, that's also for when they borrow money, the owner can't really pick you. But if they do gift tax, then they could, then they could hire you.
For sure. So really, it's the people who are soliciting your services are primarily banks that are still lending on commercial buildings. Then you're also dealing with owners of commercial properties that just have an interest in knowing what their actual appraised value of that particular property is, and then also related to, unfortunately, the state tax, where
Right.
you're dealing with people who have passed away and
Right. Typically, 99% actually, when somebody calls me to say I want an appraisal just to know the value of the building, 99.9% they never hire us because they have to pay a considerable amount of money. It's
Sure.
anywhere between 1,800 and 10,000, depending on the building, for commercial appraisal. And if you don't need it, I recommend they talk to a broker who knows. The broker doesn't have to support or write a whole report on it. However, a broker who's familiar in the area knows knows the value. It could also be called a broker opinion value. So
yeah, BPO is what we call it. Yeah, and we've had that before where people reach out to us and they're just interested in knowing what their property could be worth. But if I've had some people in the past that have said, well, I'm going to talk to an appraiser and see if I can get this appraised. And I'm like, well, if you want to pay the $2,500 or however much it's going to cost you to do it, then feel free. It's not.
Again, a broker's opinion doesn't have to provide all the legal stuff we have to provide in the report, support, etc. So
it's not a set value on the property. You're essentially just giving them an idea of what it could be worth. There's no. It's not a legal document or anything along those lines.
But appraisal has a lot of laws that you have to follow. USPAP, There's actually one more interesting client with Section 8 housing. There are probably more than I know of, but if somebody has a Section 8 building, there's a contract where one of the contracts that they could have with the government, the owner, is that every few years they estimate the market rent in that neighborhood, and then Section 8 will pay them. So how it works is the owner hires an appraiser to provide a rent comparable study. And if the appraiser is below a certain threshold, then they just accept it and Section 8 pays that rent. If it's above, then Section 8 will hire an appraiser and they would meet a middle. I don't know exactly how they compromise, but there could be two appraisers on each building.
Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't know that was something that was occurring, and that's awesome. All right, so could you walk us through the valuation process of a property? So let's say, as an example, let's take a 3-story office building, in New Jersey, for example. How would you approach that process of valuing that building?
Right. So first of all, the appraiser will go down to inspect the property. So he would try to get into all 3 stories and all the units. Let's say there's 1 unit per floor. He would look at condition. He would look at parking. He or she would look at parking. Obviously, office. New Jersey, usually there's parking there. For office, it's important to know if there's elevators, to the 2nd and 3rd floor. I'm just thinking some other important aspects to office. Visibility is less, for office if it's not service based. Again, medical, you would see if it's medical or regular general office. Again, even if it's medical office, medical office is a little higher than regular office due to the build out. You would look at the roof, what the condition of the roof is, and the basement, the mechanicals, the electricity, And so that's the first step. The first step is to look at to inspect the property. Then you go back to the office and you do the market research of let's say New Jersey, Central Jersey market, right? So you would pull in all these reports from CBRE, Cushman Wakefield, and also there are some more local brokerages who have market reports, on office market in Central Jersey. Additionally, a lot of appraisers actually call brokers to speak with them just to get a feeling of the past few months, what's going on in the office market. So then you put that all in the report. So the front end of a report is basically the pictures. You take a lot of pictures of the property. So it's pictures, it's the description of the property, it's description of the site. You pull in the flood map, the tax map, the zoning, and then also description of the neighborhood of, let's say Essex County or something. In New Jersey, you describe the employment, the income, the average income household, population. So that's the front end. Then once you get to there, then you do the market analysis. You put in all the some appraisers have different orders, but this is how I do it. Then I go to the market analysis, where I would pull in all the market reports and conclude on where it's going, where's the market going, occupancy and rental rates, etc. Then you do the three approaches to value. So we skipped the cost approach before. The cost approach basically is it's how much would an investor pay to build this, right? And then basically that's the value. So you need land comparables. So let's say this office building is on 1 acre of land. So you first value the land, right? So you get 3 comparable sales that of land. Then you actually, there's different methods, but one method is how much it costs to build. So there's different programs, for it, to see how much it builds. So in a new construction, you would probably do the cost approach, or if, let's say, some banks lend on construction loans, so it's not even built yet. So you would value it, the cost approach, when it's built. However, let's say if the building's 5 years old or 10 years old, you have to deduct the depreciation. So since that's very hard to do, most appraisers don't do cost approach on a building that's over a couple of years old. So 99% of my jobs don't have cost approach in it. So I'm just gonna, right? So you just say that and you don't do the cost approach. Fine. So sales approach. So let's say we're looking at a office building in Jersey. So there's programs, either CoStar or MLS. There's different programs. Most appraisers have CoStar, that you could do a radius search for office buildings. You put in whatever you want. Let's say it's 10,000, it's 20,000 square foot office. You could put in from 10,000 to 40,000. You have to be a little broad with your range, because you're not going to get exact what you want, And then you put a radius. Again, in New York City, if you had an office building in Brooklyn, you're going to find office buildings in 5 miles that's sold. However, in Jersey, different states, you have to broaden your search. Okay, again, so then you put in your 3, let's say 3 to 4 columns. You found 3 sales. So you now you're comparing them to the subject, and you're going to adjust. You don't adjust the subject, you adjust the comparables to the subject. So you're going to adjust for condition, for parking ratio, for elevator, if it's medical or non-medical, and you're going to get a price per square foot, concluded price per square foot, a range of the 4. And you're going to conclude on one price per square foot for the subject. That will be based on which comps are the best. So it'll be a weighted average, basically, of which are the best. If you have one comparable right next door, that will probably get the most weight than something in a different town. So then you apply that to the square footage of the subject to conclude on the subjects. Just to add, if there's a vacant unit, you may deduct after, a rent loss, till they lease it up. Or if there's, let's say, something that needs to be fixed right away, you may deduct it to the final value. Again, it's important to note that the sales approach doesn't, as you see, we didn't compare the income of the rents of the comparables. That's one of the main issues with the sales approach, is you're just taking it, while the buyers of those comparables looked at the income, you're just looking at the price per square foot without any income. So some appraisers obtain the the income of the comps, but it's pretty hard to do. So that's why it's given less weight in the final value, and the income approach is given the most weight. Any questions still here? How much?
No, I mean, I think it's phenomenal information, really, because again, it illuminates a little bit more as far as how we approach that particular process. Because you're right. I mean, a lot of times, in particular, when you're talking about markets that aren't necessarily in New York City, that is a very densely populated market, you're probably not going to find comparable properties that are similar to yours within a 5, 10, 15-mile radius. And so broadening that radius as far as your comparables, that's going to give you completely different markets, essentially, in a lot of different places. And so
also specialty, like a special use, for example, I did a fire station once, um, or a gas station. So a gas station actually uses a cost approach because there's usually no income. So you want to use two approaches typically. Besides for land, if you do a land value of an empty building, or if there's a small building on a huge property where there'll be the values in the land, the highest and best use of the value of the land. That's one approach to land value. I skipped something, that before you actually value the property, you have to. There's some research that you have to do to figure out what's the highest and best use of the property. So it's weird because it's tied to the approaches to value, but you need to know it before you actually do all your research. So maybe if it's complicated to know like what if the existing use is the highest and best use or something else, you could speak to brokers and get like a feeling of what, or do a quick analysis of, let's say, both values, and then continue on the more in-depth value of whatever you decided is the highest and best use.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we see that sometimes with properties that are older and they have like a building on site that's not necessarily very functional, and the zoning for that particular land is such that a new use that is generally either retail related could justify a higher price for the land.
Right.
So sometimes brokers will market these parcels with a building on it where the logic is they'll knock down the building, and build a new structure on top of it, and generally that's marketed at a different value.
Right, for sure. It's development site. Right.
Yeah, it would be marketed as a development site based on the zoning itself, and so that can be justified within an appraisal value just because it's it's being marketed as a XYZ.
Right. I actually just did a appraisal on it was like 70. It was like 50,000 square foot lot with a 20,000 square foot 1-story or 1.5-story office / industrial in the heart of Brooklyn, where it was a residential zoning where you could build like 5-6 stories. So it was 150,000 square foot buildable. So obviously the highest and best use is a residential,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is to build. We had a question. I just didn't see it.
Oh yeah, we'll actually get to the questions right after this. Sorry, yeah, I just want to make sure. I want to make sure that we get through the
So going to the income approach. So after you get the cost approach, if you do it, and you get the sales approach, you're gonna look at the income. Again, the income is the most important part to any investment property because that's what provides. That's what is given the most weight to determine the value. So in our example of the office, you have 3 units that are paying rent. If it's not vacant. So depending on the leases, if they're 1 to 3 year leases, you want to make sure that an investor looking at this property, if the rents are above market or below market, if the rents are above market, he will not necessarily look at the rent that's actual to provide the value, because we're looking at the property for 20 years. So when they vacate, can I replace them with the same rent or it's less? So again, let's say one way, so you basically look for rent comps. We're not done the appraisal yet. A lot more work to do.
Mm-hmm.
You have to actually provide 3 to 4 similar rent comparables of office buildings, and you also to provide a rental rate for this property. So again, some appraisers will adjust. Let's say they're paying $20 a square foot here, and I see a neighboring property pays 22. So some appraisers adjust it. I don't adjust it because it's very nitty gritty, adjusting the rental rate. I usually give a bunch of rental rates and see if it falls in the range based on the condition. The same attributes that we said in the sales approach matter, they matter in renting also, Again, the condition of the roof may not affect the tenants, so it won't affect the rental rate, but most of the characteristics that affected the sales approach would affect the rent as well. So if the rents are within range, then you probably would use, the rents, the active rents, the current contract rents. And then you add them up and get a price, you get a potential gross income. Again, if the rents are below or above, so appraisers usually do a discounted cash flow analysis, which is, for example, let's say the rents are $30 a square foot here, but everywhere else is 20. So they would apply a $20 a square foot rent for the subject. and and uh, and then get the value of the $10 every year for the next 5 years, the value of that $10 and add it to the final value. Meaning an investor who comes in is valuing it as $20 square foot. However, he's going to get cash flow $10. So how much is he willing to pay now for those extra $10 for the next 5 years, basically? So that's added after. Again, most appraisers hope that they don't have to do that because it's just more work and more unknown, So you hope that your rents are within and everything's normal, So after you get your potential gross income, you may not be done your potential gross income because you have to see, are any tenants reimbursing the landlord for taxes or for rent, water, sewer, or electricity. If they don't have their own meters, then typically banks like to see, meaning you could just you don't have to take any expense for water if tenants are paying the landlord. But most banks like to see how it's going in, meaning the landlord is paying the water, sewer, and you're reimbursing him. So they want to do it like they want it to be shown the way it really is. So you got your rent, then you do any reimbursements, and you get your total potential gross income. Then you take a vacancy and collection loss, which is vacancy is if somebody actually leaves or goes bankrupt. You want to take that into account. So typically, in the market analysis section that we mentioned, you would have some reports which states what the different reports. What are the the vacancy rates in that area? You could talk to brokers as well because again, you have to remember some of the, let's say, Central Jersey or Central Florida, there are different. It's talking about a large area. Specific submarkets will have less or more vacancy. So it's good to talk to brokers to get that submarket vacancy rate. Collection loss also, especially now during COVID, collection loss, a lot of tenants weren't paying. So you always had that, some tenants not paying. So that's why we take into account the vacancy and collection loss. Then we get to the effective gross income line. And then after that, you deduct all the expenses, taxes, water, sewer, fuel, electric, common area maintenance, and what else? And miscellaneous and repairs and maintenance and legal. So everybody has their own lines, reserves. Every owner takes off some reserves just in case, for the unknown expense, the roof or the hot water heater, etc. So you get your NOI, your net operating income. That's basically after all the expenses. That's what the owner takes home, before the mortgage. And so there's something called then you cap it, the capitalization rate. Capitalization rate is a rate which translates the income into value. So I'm sure you know it. I'm sure you could figure out this. So capitalization rate is made up of a few points. Some parts are the risk, the value add. The characteristics that we said make a difference between the sales approach and income would also apply here because a dilapidated building in bad condition versus a building in good condition will get a higher cap rate. So basically, you translate the income into value, and that's your value from the income approach. That was a long speech, and if anybody has any questions on that, we could look after.
No, it's great. It's great question. Great advice on that front. As far as the income approach is, you're trying to get an understanding of what the total income is, and that generally consists of the rents. And then what he was referencing was something either common area maintenance, where you're maintaining some of the exterior and sometimes interior parts of the facility. Sometimes that includes water. Sometimes that includes electric, depending on
everybody has their own, right?
Yeah, everyone has their own. Each building is very unique.
Right.
So obviously, what's included in the CAM is going to be very unique to that particular building. And similar logic is net charges. So net charges would be, taxes, insurance, general maintenance of the facility. So if you have
right.
Yeah. So it just depends on the types of buildings and how they use the verbiage. But that verbiage is very it's kind of universal within the commercial field. You have either net charges or CAM expenses, et cetera. So that was what he was referencing. And then as far as the cap rate's concerned, I think you're spot on. I mean, it's going to be different in every market. It's just based on what an investor is willing to pay for a certain dollar in value for
right.
income.
So certain the way we conclude on the cap rate is, you have some market reports. Like I said, the market reports are very important. You have, let's say, CoStar's market report. You have different, then you actually could, you you could put a sample of certain of similar sales with their cap rate to show, you know, what it is, and you could rate the subject where it should be in that range. Yeah, and then after you have all your approaches, it's called reconciliation. You actually go about saying where should we put our subject. On, let's say, a small industrial property where it may be for owner occupied use, you know, for owner user. There you could give equal weight, even though it's a commercial property. Some people give equal weight to the income approach and the sales approach. Whereas a 40-unit building, for sure, you'll give most weight to the income.
Yeah, it's just because it's producing the income. That the reason why they're buying it to begin with is because it's an income producing property. Right. Versus with owner occupied properties, the reason they're using it is to occupy it for their business use. So it'd be slightly different. Cool, man. That's great. Go ahead.
No, I like to say that the way a broker comes to value and the appraiser is not much different. I just feel that the way we have to report it is very different. And also that since we have to report it a certain way, it can change somewhat of the value because it has to be really, really supportable, you know?
Oh yeah, because again, you're being held to the standard, right? Because in our case, I could give you an idea of what your property may be worth, but you know, you can't come to me and say, well, you told me my building was worth XYZ. Whereas now, if they come to an appraiser because you know you overvalued or undervalued or whatever the property, that obviously can, you know, be something that's not. So you just got to be very. I mean, it's a lot more meticulous as far as the process of valuation is concerned. So. It's awesome. So what are some of the common pitfalls you see buyers and sellers make pertaining to the appraisal process?
Right. So again, I think at the time they order their appraisal, there's not much to do in terms of value. So they can't really mess up a value or, you know, or add value really. It's whatever it is. But I would say that, as you said, during a transaction, you know, they really want it very quick. And then I've had people that, you know, they ask for it so quickly, and when I call them, they don't even answer, and it's hard to get an inspection. So, you know, I think if you want your appraisal to, you know, to be expedited and actually, you know, you want to make your closing date, then you know, make sure the appraiser gets what he needs. Make sure you know, somebody can meet him by the property, and also all the documents. For example, we ask for the rent roll, and we also ask from the seller. Really, the buyer doesn't. I mean, the buyer may have it, but we ask them for 3 years operating expenses just to see. But I actually skipped that part, that we analyze the operating expenses of the subject, but we definitely also compare it to comps. Again, you need also operating expense comps, so to make sure that it's not, you know, way low or way high, you know. Again, so if you provide the documents, you know, right away, the appraiser could meet his deadline and actually, you know, get it to you. If you're out of town and you can't come, they will be delayed a week, you know.
Oh, for sure, yeah, and like we were saying offline, we were mentioning how there is quite a shortage of commercial appraisals and appraisers, and I'm assuming it's similar in your area where you know a big part of the process, even the due diligence process, is held up because of the appraiser, not necessarily because it's their fault. It's just there's less people out there, and then like you said, the information is not provided quickly all the time, especially when you're dealing with people who, you know, are mom and pop shops that haven't done, you know, financials very meticulously over a period of time. That can be obviously slow the process.
Right. I actually remember another thing. A lot of times, let's say with a bank, the borrower who applied for the loan can say different things about their property which aren't really true, meaning very not true, and then the appraiser goes there and sees, you know, you said it's office building, it's retail building, and that could also hold, because then you have to tell the bank that it's different and they put it on hold. And then with banks and corporate, you know, it takes time to get back on, so that can also affect the timeline.
For sure. So really just being upfront and honest at all times, being responsive, and, you know, just making sure you provide all the documentation you need. I think that's good advice all around as far as the buyers and sellers are concerned. So go ahead.
I don't think this is one of the questions that you mentioned, but I actually had a couple of not funny stories, like interesting appraisal inspections. Do you mind if I cut
Yeah,
in?
go ahead. Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah, so basically, like I mentioned, the first 2.5 years you have to be trained by somebody. They don't always. It's called a trainee and I even forgot what it's called, maybe mentor. So they in the beginning they have to go with you to inspection as well because they teach you the ins and out of the inspection. Once you're competent doing it yourself, I don't. They don't. It depends on the state, but you don't necessarily have to. They don't have to come with you. So anyway, I was with my, my employer, and we actually got locked into a room, and we couldn't get out, and we didn't have phone and we were knocking, and they didn't answer basically. So I actually called the neighboring. There was a door to the neighboring parcel, so I actually called. I couldn't get their number. I called my wife to call that store to open the door for us. So that was one scary story. Um, yeah, another one actually. My father had it. He went up to a condo in New York City, and a dog actually came. It was an empty building. The doorman let him in. A German Shepherd, actually almost came out, and I guess he told the dog like, "You go in," and the dog like listened and went in, and he was saved, I guess.
That's crazy, man.
So
I can
scary.
only imagine. I can only imagine some of the stories, in particular, some of these buildings that have been vacant for a while. I can only imagine, even being just being careful in those
Right,
types of
right.
environments. So that's awesome. So I guess we'll dive into the next one, which is really what are some of the best resources if people want to learn a little bit more about the appraisal process. What are some of the best resources they can reference as it pertains to commercial appraisals?
Right. There's so similar to like national, realtors or something.
Mhm.
There is something organization called Appraisal Institute, which they have offices all over the country, and they advocate for appraisers and also provide education. They actually have a designation program where you could, get a higher designation, and they just have a lot of good resources for appraisers. They have webinars and again, like I said, each state, even in New Jersey, they have two offices. They have two. When you're a member of them, you go to like dinners and you go to networking events. So they have a job board. So definitely that's the first resource you should go to. And then there's a website called Appraiser Forum where appraisers just talk about everything. So you can go there and get some news.
That's awesome. Yeah, those are some two great resources as
Yeah, the
far as
third resource is appraisers, like you mentioned, is a shortage. It's a lot of the appraisers are older, and they really love their profession. Like they worked on it for very long. So if you call an older appraiser, I'm sure they'll talk about it for a long time with you. So yeah.
Oh, for sure. No, that's some great advice, and I really do appreciate you sharing that information with us. So, as far as the prepared questions, that's kind of what I had for you right now. I just
Yeah,
wanted to be
sure.
able to open it up for Q&A for everyone in the audience, and then you guys who are watching on Facebook, feel free to type in the box as well, and we'll get to you shortly. So, Don had a question. Actually, no, I think Rodney. Sorry, I think he was ahead of us. Will you be able to get a copy of this recording? Yes, you will be able to. We are filming this as well. It'll be on the YouTube channel. I will be sending it out to all the attendees and really the email list for the CRE 101 meetup tomorrow. So you'll be able to have that ready to go and you can check it out. All right. So Dawn, she asks, how do you factor value adjustment due to vacancy? That's a good question.
Right. So again, there's the vacancy in the subject. Um, Typically, again, it depends if it could be rented within, in New York City pre-COVID. Let's say a real nice, a regular building, and the lease up is 1 or 2 months for a 40-unit building. For let's say one unit's vacant, you're not necessarily going to take um, a special. You're not going to deduct a rent loss. We always take a vacancy and collection loss, meaning you find some brokers actually in their OM, they say, it's 100%. They use the income that's there, but they don't take a factor for, like, let's say, a vacancy and collection loss. All appraisers do that. Again, maybe because we have to be a little more conservative. So even if it's 100% occupied, we are going to take the normal vacancy rate. Um, Again, we're going to see how it applies to our subject. But for example, if office vacancy rate is 7 to 10% in New Jersey, or 7 to 12%, if the subject is 100% occupied, you may take 7%. If it's a good building, So that's, before you get your income. I think your question is if you actually have a vacant space in let's say a shopping center, you have a 10,000 square foot vacant space, which is you're having a hard time renting it. A lot of appraisers would deduct. Again, some appraisers may add a percent in that original vacancy and collection loss line. Instead of, let's say 7, they'll do 9 or 8 or 9. But a lot of appraisers will, let's say, when they get their final value in each approach. So let's say the income approach, the value was 2 million, and this space, the rental rate, the monthly rent is 2,000, and you think you take a rent loss, you think that it could get rented in 3 months. If it's properly marketed, you think it could get rented in 3 months. You'll deduct $6,000 at the end, and then also you take a broker fee after you have to take off. So again, you're going to count. Right, I'm sorry, I didn't mention this. Let's say you have 3. Back to our office space. I'm sorry. If you have a vacant unit, we always apply market rent to the vacant unit. It's different than actually investors. Investors, they call that value add. They'll use their income that's there and cap it, and then the rest will be value add. However, with appraisers, we always add a market rent to the vacant space. That's why after, when we get our final value, we will deduct how long it will take to get to there, the rent loss. And in owner-occupied spaces also, if you have a warehouse that's owner-occupied and the bank wants to know the value, we will apply a market rent to the space. I didn't mention that before, sorry, yeah.
No, that makes sense. And again, you have those two approaches. If it's owner-occupied, you probably put more weight. There's more weight on the sales side than it is maybe the income side. But part of the analysis for both the sales and income, with the income side, you're looking at if I were to buy this as an investment property, what would the value be based on market rents in the area? Yeah, that's great.
Yes, I hope I answered the question. That we apply market rent to the property, to the vacant unit, and then many appraisers will deduct at the end, how many months rent loss or concessions, what we have to give to get the space rented at what we applied, at the market rent that we applied,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and if you haven't noticed at this point, it is an art and a science. It's kind of a blend of the two, where the calculations are definitely science, but where you calculate, okay, what's the vacancy rate to apply, what's the current market rents, what's et cetera, that's a lot more of the art, right? You've kind of done it for quite some time, and you kind of get a feel. You talk to brokers, you talk to different people in the business to kind of get a feel for all these different numbers. And again, it's not an exact science, but again, you do it enough, and you start getting to a point where you can. I'm assuming at this point you feel pretty comfortable especially in particular markets. I feel like you definitely feel.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, let me check. Facebook as well. So he wants to hear on the gas. So could you elaborate a little bit on the gas station example? I think he was referencing, Randy was referencing on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the gas station typically aren't rented, so there's no income over there. If they have a convenience store, then maybe it's a little different. But again, in the market that I am in, typically appraisers will do. Again, we don't want to just do one approach to value. So we will do the cost approach and the income approach. And the sales approach. So we'll get the second approach is a sales approach. We'll get similar gas stations were sold in the area. And again, each asset class has their own characteristics which provide value and which take away from value. So a gas station, the visibility will be, large. The signs, do they have a convenience store? Because when you're driving on the highway and you have 2 gas stations, one has a 7-Eleven, or why are you going to go there? Or one has a bathroom, you're going to go there. So, also right? So then, I guess how many stations do they have? A car wash, etc. So that's in the sales approach. In the cost approach, you're going to get land. You get land value, similar to all types of cost approach. And again, you're going to figure out how much it costs to build this. So you're going to look at the storage, the tanks under. What type of tanks are they? They each have different value. what size. You're gonna look how many, does it have a canopy over it? You know, that costs money to build. So you give value for that. You're gonna give value for how many pumps and how many, how many islands they have. If they have like where the person who's pumping the gas could sit in, or do they have there? Do they have, So you basically value piece by piece how much it would cost to build, and then you'll take a depreciation. If it's 5 years old, you take less of a depreciation. If it's 20 years old, you take more of a depreciation. Again, that approach is also hard because the depreciation is hard to figure out,
Yeah, for sure. So really what you're saying is that you have the three different approaches that you use: the sales approach, the income approach, and the cost approach. And each method of valuing that commercial property requires you to perform certain things. With the sales approach, you look at comparables in the area, and then you add or subtract depending on the characteristics of that particular property. Obviously, if it's a retail property, you're going to put a higher weight on visibility, traffic counts, etc. If it's an office building,
also, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's going to have a different weight depending on what type of property it is. On the income approach, it's just based on the income produced by the property and cap rates of the area. And then on the cost approach is how much does it cost to build all the components of that particular
minus
property.
Depreciation, right?
Minus
with the land, the cost, and then the minus depreciation, right?
Yeah, and so that applies across the spectrum as far as the type of commercial property.
Correct.
That's awesome. Okay, so I'm just checking on Facebook as well. If you guys have any other questions in the chat box. All right. So Don asks, what's your resource for component costs? So how would you know how much a pump costs, for example, in the example that you just provided?
Yeah, so at a gas station, I would use Marshall and Swift. Their cost, they show you the cost of each thing. Again, if I'm actually appraising a new building, where they have the plans, they have the construction, the cost on hand, I would do both. I would use Marshall and Swift, make a grid for Marshall and Swift, and then I would also use the actual, construction cost, and probably give more weight to the actual. But then again, if I'm appraising a building that's going to be built, so I also have the construction estimate, then I may not give as much weight to the estimate as I would if it's already built, but I would use both and somewhere come in the middle. With Marshall and Swift, they actually they have costs for the whole United States, but then they have like a ratio or like a rate to apply depending on the market you're in. Because I guess it depends the cost.
Oh yeah,
you are,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I'll even say this, with construction costs rising as much as they are, a lot of people are rethinking whether or not it's worth it in a lot of situations to build. So that's obviously bringing more people into the buying of actual existing properties, and so that affects cap rates, right? Because if people are willing to pay less or pay more for a building, that's going to compress cap rates. Right. So yeah, it's interesting. It's economics, 100%. So it's very interesting, and I'm sure that affects the way you appraise a property, right? If cap rates get compressed because of we're in a low interest rate environment, there's a lot of money in the economy right now. I'm assuming that also affects how you value income producing property in particular.
Right. If people if there's more of a demand and the prices are dropping, then the prices are increasing and the cap rates are dropping, then that would affect the market. Typically, I don't, just by that statement, it won't change. I probably would want to see actual results changing and then applying it,
Sure. Great advice. Awesome. Check Facebook real quick. Any other questions you guys have? All right. Awesome. I think you answered all the questions. So I mean,
okay. If I didn't, then anybody could reach out to me.
Yeah. I was gonna ask actually. Could you tell us how people can reach out to you? And I will include all this if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're watching this via podcast or listening to this via podcast, we'll be sharing all this contact information in the description as well. So.
Yeah. So I just posted my my email. Don't ask advice to find mentors in your local market. Oh yeah, definitely. Like I said, in order to get licensed, you need to have a mentor. I guess in any business, a mentor is very important. So in appraisals, they actually make you get a mentor. So that's the Appraisal Institute actually also, if you're in a certain program, they supply you with a mentor, but some people aren't in the program, so definitely a mentor is important. Yeah, again, my company appraises in New York, New Jersey, and we're getting licensed in Florida. So, but if you need any services anywhere, I'm happy to put you in touch with the people that I know nationally.
Oh, for sure. And for those of you guys who are listening via podcast, his email is ben@superiorvaluation.com. And again, that's going to be in the description section as well. Ben, really appreciate your time. And yeah, if you guys are listening to this, watching this on YouTube, it will be on video in perpetuity. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Really appreciate all the support. And then finally, if you're listening to this in a podcast format, feel free to drop a 5-star review. It helps with more and more as far as spreading the message. So
Okay, thanks so much for having me.
yeah,
Appreciate
thanks,
it.
guys. Really appreciate all you guys' time. We'll see
Thanks
you
so
guys.
much. Thank you.
See ya.